Imagine living in the year 630 AD. If someone had asked you which civilization would dominate the Middle East for centuries to come, you would probably have pointed to the Byzantine Empire. After all, the Byzantines were the direct heirs of the Roman Empire. They possessed magnificent cities, professional armies, vast wealth, and centuries of military experience. Their capital, Constantinople, was one of the greatest cities on earth. At the same time, Arabia was viewed by many outsiders as a distant desert land inhabited by tribes that frequently fought one another. Few people could have imagined that within a few decades, armies emerging from Arabia would conquer Syria, Palestine, Egypt, and much of North Africa, permanently changing world history. So how did this happen? How did the Arabs manage to conquer nearly half of the Byzantine Empire in such a short period of time? To understand this extraordinary transformation, we must first look at the condition of the Byzantine Empire before the Arab conquests began. For centuries, the Byzantine Empire had been one of the dominant powers of the ancient world. However, by the early 7th century, the empire had become trapped in a brutal struggle with its greatest rival, the Sassanian Empire. The war between these two superpowers lasted for decades and became one of the most destructive conflicts of the ancient era. The Persians invaded Byzantine territories and captured vast regions including Syria, Palestine, and Egypt. Even Jerusalem fell into Persian hands. Churches were destroyed, cities were devastated, and the empire appeared to be on the verge of collapse. Then came one of the most remarkable comebacks in military history. Under Emperor Heraclius, the Byzantines launched a series of successful campaigns deep into Persian territory. Eventually, the Persians were defeated, and the lost territories were recovered. But there was a problem. Although the Byzantines had technically won the war, victory came at an enormous cost. The treasury was nearly exhausted. Entire regions had been devastated. Thousands of experienced soldiers had been killed. Farms had been abandoned. Trade had been disrupted. The empire had survived, but it was exhausted. At almost the exact moment when the Byzantines were recovering from this devastating conflict, a new force was emerging in Arabia. The rise of Islam under Muhammad transformed the political landscape of the Arabian Peninsula. Before this period, Arabia was divided among numerous tribes with their own rivalries and conflicts. Tribal warfare was common, and there was no unified political authority governing the entire peninsula. Through religious, political, and military efforts, much of Arabia became united under a single leadership. After Muhammad's death in 632 AD, several tribes rebelled against the new state. These rebellions were defeated during the Ridda Wars under the leadership of Abu Bakr. The result was historic. For perhaps the first time, most of Arabia was politically united. The energy that had once been spent on internal tribal conflicts could now be directed outward. This unity gave the Arabs something they had rarely possessed before: a common purpose. Another major factor behind the success of the Arab conquests was leadership. The early Muslim armies were led by some of the most talented commanders of their era. Among them, none became more famous than Khalid ibn al-Walid. Khalid demonstrated an extraordinary ability to move armies rapidly across difficult terrain, exploit enemy weaknesses, and adapt to changing battlefield conditions. His campaigns became legendary because they repeatedly achieved victories against larger and more established opponents. However, military leadership alone cannot explain the scale of these conquests. The structure of the Arab armies also played an important role. Many soldiers came from harsh desert environments where mobility, endurance, and adaptability were essential for survival. These armies often traveled across routes that their enemies considered difficult or impossible. They moved quickly, struck unexpectedly, and frequently forced larger enemy forces to react rather than take the initiative. While the Arabs were gaining strength, the Byzantines faced another challenge that is often overlooked. Many of the populations living in Syria and Egypt did not necessarily feel a strong loyalty toward Constantinople. Religious disagreements had created tensions within the empire for generations. Different Christian communities often found themselves in conflict with the religious policies supported by the imperial government. This does not mean that people universally welcomed the new conquerors. Reality was much more complicated. Some resisted fiercely, while others cooperated. However, the Byzantine authorities could not always rely on the complete support of every community within their territories. The decisive moment came in 636 AD at the Battle of Yarmouk. This battle is considered by many historians to be one of the most important military engagements in world history. The Byzantines assembled a large force with the goal of driving the Muslim armies out of Syria and restoring imperial control over the region. The stakes could not have been higher. If the Byzantines won, the expansion of the Arab armies might have ended before it truly began. If they lost, the consequences would be enormous. The battle lasted several days. Despite facing a powerful Byzantine force, the Muslim army demonstrated superior coordination, flexibility, and battlefield leadership. The Byzantines eventually suffered a devastating defeat. Yarmouk changed everything. After this defeat, Byzantine control over Syria effectively collapsed. One of the empire's richest and most strategically important provinces was lost. The consequences did not stop there. Soon attention turned toward Egypt. Egypt was perhaps the most valuable province in the Byzantine Empire. The region produced enormous amounts of agricultural wealth and generated vital tax revenues. For centuries, Egyptian grain had helped feed major cities across the eastern Mediterranean. When Muslim forces under Amr ibn al-As invaded Egypt, the Byzantines attempted to resist. However, the empire's resources were already stretched thin. After a series of campaigns, Egypt was conquered. The loss of Egypt was a disaster for Byzantium. Not only did the empire lose one of its wealthiest provinces, but it also lost a major source of food, revenue, and manpower. The economic impact was enormous and would be felt for generations. At this point, many people might wonder why the Byzantines could not simply raise another army and reconquer their territories. The answer lies in geography and logistics. The Byzantine Empire was enormous. It had to defend the Balkans from various invasions, protect Anatolia, maintain naval forces in the Mediterranean, secure trade routes, and guard multiple frontiers simultaneously. Every military defeat weakened its ability to respond elsewhere. Every lost province reduced tax income. Every reduction in revenue made it harder to recruit and equip soldiers. Meanwhile, the expanding caliphate was gaining access to new resources, new populations, and new wealth with every successful campaign. Momentum began to favor the conquerors. Yet one of the most impressive aspects of the Arab conquests was not simply winning battles. It was maintaining control afterward. Conquering territory is one challenge. Governing it is another. The early Islamic State often preserved existing administrative structures rather than destroying them completely. Local officials frequently continued working under the new rulers. Tax systems remained operational. Trade continued. Urban centers survived. This administrative continuity helped transform military victories into long-term political control. However, despite suffering these enormous losses, the Byzantine Empire did not disappear. In fact, one of the most remarkable aspects of this story is that Byzantium survived at all. The empire adapted to its new reality. It reorganized its military system, strengthened its defenses, and concentrated its remaining resources on protecting Anatolia and the capital. Most importantly, Constantinople itself never fell to the early Arab conquests. Massive attempts to capture the city failed. The famous walls of Constantinople remained one of the greatest defensive systems in world history. Because the capital survived, the Byzantine Empire survived. Although it lost Syria, Palestine, Egypt, and much of North Africa, the empire continued to exist for nearly 800 more years. When we examine the Arab conquest of half of the Byzantine Empire, we discover that there was no single reason for this extraordinary success. The Byzantine Empire was exhausted after decades of war with Persia. Arabia had achieved a level of unity it had rarely experienced before. Skilled commanders led highly mobile armies. Internal religious tensions weakened imperial cohesion in some regions. Decisive victories such as Yarmouk shattered Byzantine defenses. The conquest of Egypt crippled the empire economically. Effective administration helped secure conquered territories, while Byzantine overstretch made recovery increasingly difficult. All of these factors combined to create one of the most dramatic shifts in power in world history. The Arab conquests were not simply the story of one empire defeating another. They marked the emergence of a new civilization that would shape the politics, culture, religion, and history of the Middle East, North Africa, and beyond for centuries to come. And perhaps the most fascinating part is that almost nobody saw it coming. Just a few years earlier, the Byzantine Empire appeared victorious, while Arabia seemed peripheral to world affairs. Yet history can change with astonishing speed, and in the 7th century, the balance of power across the known world was transformed forever.